I want to welcome everyone today to this webinar that is presented by Keizai Silicon Valley. I'm Richard Dasher. I direct the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center at Stanford University, and we're very happy to support the Keizai program by hosting the Zoom for today's meeting. And I'm also on the board of the Keizai Silicon Valley, which has a history of more than 30 years. It's a networking organization for people who have an interest in U.S.-Japan business. Keizai puts on several great programs every year, maybe between 7 and 8 programs every year, as well as a large New Year's reception. And we are still learning how to get by with this online only world of post-COVID-19. And so I'm very happy to introduce today the moderator for our program, who is Ms. Ji-Young Choi. And I've known Ji-Young for a couple of years now. She is the Chief Operating Officer at ValueNext Incorporated. And she is building the team and expanding the business of ValueNext here in Silicon Valley especially. She has market experience through Morgan Stanley, building portfolio strategies for financial institutions and operating entities. She has a master's in business administration from Yale and also a master's degree in chemistry and biotech from the University of Tokyo. She is versed in Korean, Japanese, English, and Chinese. So I would like to give the floor to Ji-Young and ask her to introduce the rest of the panel. Ji-Young, floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Dasher. Hi, my name is Ji-Young Choi. Actually, I'm the program manager at Keizai Silicon Valley. And today, actually, I recruited our member, Sam Wiley, for the moderator. But I will host the event tonight. So thank you all for joining. So as Professor Richard mentioned, I work at ValueNext. Actually, ValueNext is the predictive analytics company providing value by creating insights for innovations through our big data visualization algorithms. And ValueNext is headquartered in Tokyo, Japan, but I'm currently working for a US subsidiary in Silicon Valley, trying to connect US and Japan and expand business here. So today's topic is digital transformation, how COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation. So we'll have a panel discussion to talk about the opportunities and the risk presented by digital transformation in the COVID-19 era. So we have amazing 3 panelists, Daniel McCulloch from Veritas Technologies, Ken Kumama from Skaden, and we have Vanessa Liu from SAP, and our moderator for tonight, Sam Wiley from ValueNext, who I recruited for this webinar. Before we jump onto the panel discussion, actually, please allow me to introduce our sponsors who helped us to run the event tonight. So first, we have a platinum sponsor, Pegasus Tech Ventures. We have gold sponsors, Procopio, Sunbridge, Wilson Sonsini. We have silver sponsors, Taza International, ZL Tech. We have bronze sponsors, Itoen, Jetro, Nedo, Provider, Teraoka, TMI Associates, US Asia Venture Partners, and JTB. So thank you all for your sponsorship. So for today, we will have 35-minute panel discussion and 15-minute Q&A sessions. So please feel free to type the questions on the chat if you have any questions, and I will gather all those questions and pass it over to our moderator, Sam. So now I'd like to pass the mic over to Sam to introduce our panelists and start the panel discussion. So Sam, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ji-Young. So today's discussion, I wanted to kick it off with just a very short couple slides to kind of frame what we're going to be talking about. So if you'll let me share my screen just very quickly. So we're talking about digital transformation, and one of the things that was kind of mentioned right before this call by some of the leadership from Keizai is digital transformation can mean so many things to so many people. You know, it could be anything from simply going from a very paper-heavy environment to a very digital environment where, you know, literally AI, machine learning is driving a lot of the processes. And so we thought it'd be kind of interesting to kind of help visualize what we're talking about today. Jiyoung and I actually took some information and processed it through some technology we have at ValueNext, and to really look at, you know, this, where we are with digital transformation. We actually took about 15 years, 25 years of Crunchbase data, looking for companies with the focus as being digital transformation. And we entered into our software and kind of wanted to see, you know, where we are now and where we've been. And from this sort of graph here, you see a lot of different technologies that really make up digital transformation. Everything from app web development, artificial intelligent robots, UI UX design. But if we kind of look at the timeline here, and if you imagine that timeline being sort of you know, the center of gravity for all these different roughly 992 startups working in the digital transformation space, where they've been and where they're going, we really see kind of a logical transition, really starting in e-commerce in 1995, kind of traveling through CRM and maybe some things that we've all been through in the past 10 years of managing our data more correctly. And now we're really in the area which, you know, some of our speakers are very well versed in, which is really kind of the day-to-day operations, financial services, legal operations, things like that. Those are the processes being digitally transformed. And the technologies needed to do this are really kind of interesting. They showed up very strongly in this graph, but they're not going to be a surprise to anyone on this call. Again, kind of starting out with software. Now we're moving into spaces like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, kind of all the things we're going through right now, really bringing digital technologies into every aspect of the workplace. And we, of course, one of our speakers today is very focused on this, which is kind of what kind of white spaces are being created? What are the opportunities? So if we think of all the different clusters in this chart as being a different kind of company or technology, what are the spaces we can look at that are really sort of ripe for development? And that brings me to today's speakers. So kind of in no particular order, we do have Vanessa Liu. She's a vice president with SAP.io. Which is the early stage venture arm of SAP, investing in and accelerating startups and enterprise technology. She oversees SAP.io's North American foundries, which is really all about integrating with SAP solutions. So she's really going to be our expert today on understanding how that white space I was talking about. What are the great new opportunities? What are we looking for? What things are developing? And kind of talking about our overall theme, you know, has COVID-19 accelerated this digital transformation, and what would she then be focusing on? We have Daniel Mihalik. He's a senior manager of legal operations at Veritas Technologies. Daniel is currently advising general counsel on operational strategy in the legal department and leads initiatives around overseeing financial management, law firm, and legal vendor management. So again, kind of thinking back to that process of where we are in digital transformation, Daniel's very much an expert in operations and how we're making this transition. And then lastly, we have Ken Kumiyama, who is a partner in IP and technology at the law firm Skadden. Ken concentrates his practice on IP transactions matters as well as privacy. And one of his foci is really on you know, mergers and acquisitions with companies that have a very technology-heavy focus. This is obviously extremely important when you're thinking about not just digital transformation, but specifically digital transformation in the era of COVID-19. So very excited to have Ken joining us today. And with that, I think we'll get started with our questions. Let me change my screen so I can see everyone's faces just a little bit here. So first question for the panel, and maybe starting with Daniel, since you're on the left of the screen here, can each of you go around and talk about your background and how your role really intersects with the idea of digital transformation? And perhaps as an added bonus question, can you tell us what digital transformation means to you personally?
Sure. So first things first, I just want to mention that the little icon with my name says David, but I'm actually Daniel. I'm not sure how this happened. There's been a cross. Might be my alter ego, I'm not sure. So digital transformation in my world today, in what I do day to day, has really accelerated in everything I do, starting back in March when our company's leadership team sat the COVID response team down, and we really looked at the business continuity plans and how can we transition from working in an office, working with paper, to working completely digitally. This actually forced and accelerated the company to look at a mobile selling model so that we weren't tied to physical offices anymore. We've actually shut down a number of our e-suites. We've shut down a number of our facilities. So people are really focused on selling remotely, doing e-business, doing e-commerce, but also just doing their day-to-day jobs from home. From my perspective, what it has meant is standing up our legal organization so that everybody can be working remotely and as successfully and efficiently as possible from home. So for example, one of the things that we needed to do was we needed to get a number of very thick, very long contracts digitized so that people can work on them from home, because we were used to grabbing those contracts from file cabinets in the office. So we had to figure out a way to get those scanned in and sent out to people and hosted online so we could work from them remotely without having to rely on the paper. But it also meant having to get people technology, get them monitors, get them printers, get them the technology and the infrastructure they need at home so that this digital transformation can actually take place. And then I think, and that's my dog just making a guest appearance in the background there, but we've also taken the opportunity and sort of used this opportunity to say, okay, what have we been doing in the past that we really don't need to be doing anymore because it was bogging us down? And the answer to that question was all of the paper, all the tangible things that we were doing before were holding us back. And so the method that we get signatures on documents with, now we use an e-signature platform. Reviewing contracts, reviewing documents, reviewing all of that information. We're not passing that from desk to desk, office to office anymore. We're Zooming with each other. We're getting on Teams calls. We're doing this with far less paper, far less tactical interactions, and a lot more electronic interactions.
Great. And Vanessa, what about you? Could you talk to us a little bit about how your role specifically intersects with digital transformation? I think I stole your thunder by telling the giving it away a little bit, but we'd love to hear your take on it, as well as maybe your personal definition of digital transformation.
Yes, happy to. Thanks so much, Sam. So being the early stage venture arm for SAP, we are always looking for companies that are basically early stage, so anywhere between seed to up and including Series C, for us to work with. And so this is about being able to invest in them on the one hand. On the other hand, it's also being able to create an ecosystem so that our customers can access the solutions that these companies offer. And so we are looking across all of the industries that we're active in. So we define industries along 27 categories, and the programs that we run are focused around each industry at a different point in time. So we run 2 programs a year in each of our 9 locations globally around that particular industry. And we ask our customers, what types of pain points do you want solved? And that's how we create a brief so that we can go out there and look for startups. So for us, digital transformation is at the core of what we do. It has always been at the core of what we do. And if anything, the last few months has really changed. So this is about how can our customers get their workflows digitized even faster. I think Daniel was just mentioning that there are a lot of processes that are analog. How can you digitize that? We've been looking at healthcare, for instance, and the reams of data that providers have, that pharma companies have. How can we use that data to extract the insights that are there just that much more quickly? Or for instance, to process claims faster for insurance companies or for retailers It's how do we serve the customer that was coming in through our door, was also coming in online, but ensure that the experience that they are getting is holistic and it's consistent across the vein. So it really differs industry by industry. And that is really the core of what I do, which is work with startups, get them into our ecosystem, and then take them to our customers who can access their technologies.
Fantastic. And then Ken, from your perspective, how does your role specifically interface with digital transformation as a advisor, as an attorney? And then what's your personal definition of digital transformation?
Sure. So, I mean, my definition, I think, is really what Vanessa and Daniel already said. I don't think I have anything sort of new or insightful to add there. What I would say, though, that's maybe interesting is, in some ways, I feel like I straddle both visions that they share in terms of how digital transformation is relevant to their day-to-day. Because as an advisor to other companies, I'm thinking about sort of the risks and the technologies associated with digital transformation. And then on the flip side, I'm also a partner at an international law firm. And so we're running a business, and we have, just the day-to-day operational stuff that, Daniel mentioned. And I think, so I get to think about it from Vanessa's lens. We don't really work with startups so much. We're maybe acquiring the smaller companies, if anything, or helping someone invest. But certainly looking at it from that technology lens, as well as sort of the operational aspect of it. And so it's interesting to just hear both of their perspectives. But I certainly share a lot of their thoughts there.
Fantastic. And so I think our next question then is one of the topics we want to talk about today. It's sort of in the title of the panel is, for better or worse, COVID-19 has really affected how organizations need to engage with digital transformation. And, perhaps one hypothesis that we want to talk about is it accelerating that? And I guess, is this true from everyone's vantage point? Is this correct? Is it, is it something that, is going to last beyond COVID-19, if it's true, and all of the above? Maybe Vanessa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, for sure. Like the industries that I was closest to over the last few months include travel, which was very unfortunate that we were doing a travel program in the midst of the pandemic. It was something that we had picked earlier, but it was really on the corporate enterprise side and retail tech. And so we saw huge transformations in both. Like obviously for retail tech, I think we are all quite familiar with the fact that so many retailers overnight saw themselves like really pitted up against Amazon as a juggernaut and who has been digital only from the get-go. And how do you compete with that as a brick and mortar? You've seen how Walmart has responded. You've seen now companies such as the Home Depot or like Lowe's or Tractor Supply really just seen the percentage points of their e-commerce business just really shoot through the roof. Like the type of penetration that we were expecting to happen the next 3 to 5 years really happened over the last few months. But a lot of the processes internally were not yet ready for that. And so you heard about customer service lines, like people waiting hours and hours and hours to be served because companies weren't ready for the onslaught of Q&As that were coming through. And how do you manage that to the fulfillment side? And actually what we've seen is a very big opportunity for startups that have these point solutions to come in and to work together with a lot of these retailers who are just really open now for innovation.
No, that's actually very interesting, and I hadn't, the openness to change is probably something that's sort of inevitable from all of this. Daniel, how does that sort of, I guess what's your take on it first? Do you even agree with this? And if so, kind of what's your take on some of the things Vanessa just said?
Yeah, I do totally agree with it. And one of the things that stood out to me that Vanessa was mentioning is Veritas faced a very similar fate, right? We had a longer term strategy for mobilizing our sales force and going to a more remote sales model. The presence of COVID-19 and the importance and the necessity to work remotely pushed that time frame up And we had to get all of those plans that were more long-term scheduled out done in 3 to 5 months. And I think with a lot of credit to our workforce operations team and our sales team, we were able to recognize all of that happening so that we could put together very succinct plans for our customers. What does it mean for you? What does it mean for your people? And then also very specific plans for our channel partners, because we rely heavily, on that channel distribution partner network. So yeah, I totally agree with what Vanessa is saying. And I think one of the things that we have as a company have had to realize is that this fundamentally changes the face of our organization. So we're not a brick and mortar. You can't go to the corner store and buy Veritas appliance. We do everything electronically. However, our distribution channel, our partners, our customers are all places like the US Army, Amazon, FedEx, UPS, who rely on our systems and our processes. So if their data can't be up, their data can't be backed up, and their data is not going to be protected, that obviously negatively affects Veritas and the brand and everything that goes on there. So the level of engagement that we've needed to have has been, on a scale of 1 to 100, 1,000%. We have had to be, and I've been in meetings that have been sort of not necessarily knockdown, drag out conversations about how do we transform this business. It's, okay, we've been laying the foundation for this very slowly, but now we need to do this very quickly, and we had to turn it around. And we've seen very positive results, right? Our sales are up, our renewals are up, our continuing business is up. So the customers are responding to it. We're able to respond to our customers. And at the same time, we've been able to land some pretty big deals. So in terms of digitizing our business transformation, not just from a legal perspective, but from a company-wide perspective, because of that foundation that we've been laying, because of the foundation that we've been setting for ourselves to be successful at an e-commerce sort of setup, I think it's really put us in a position to be very successful right now.
No, and that's really interesting. You might think a company like Veritas is the sort that might maybe can't hide from having to deal with this, but might be a little insulated. But ultimately, your customers are not. So that's a really interesting observation, I think.
That's right. We had no choice. We couldn't hide from this. And I think, to the credit of our leadership team, got way out in front of it, because we saw that this was going to be happening eventually anyway. And so we sort of just bit the bullet and did it right now.
Fabulous. And then Ken, I know you already mentioned you kind of wear two hats here, but both as a person who advises your clients and also as a person who's an employee of one of the world's largest, globe spanning law firms, I guess. How do you, what's going on from your vantage point?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, as an outside advisor, most of my clients are quite large. And so while they have a lot of challenges, like, along the lines of what Daniel mentioned, we're probably not going to be involved in those day to day. So while they affect our clients and, we're aware of them, they're not going to be asking us how to do it right, because, the internal operations team is going to know better than we will. So we don't even pretend to try. But, and in terms of big scale, like M&A, certainly there are some examples of that. But by and large, it seems like it's more or less business as usual. The bigger effect, I'd say, is more internally, as a law firm. Law firms in many ways, I think, are kind of low-tech businesses, right? Very much so, like perhaps embarrassingly so, just to say it. And any lawyers or recovering lawyers can know exactly what I'm talking about. We've used, phones and internet for as long as they've been around, more or less. And I think we're very used to and capable of working across time zones, across offices. We do that every single day. So in many ways, we were already kind of there. But there certainly was an acceleration of an adoption of certain technologies that it's kind of like, if you don't need to change, then why do it, is kind of the big law firm's attitude, especially where there's some additional risk involved. And now the risk to not adopting far outweighs whatever, marginal risk there is to adoption. So, as a result, we weren't allowed to probably have Zooms, half a year ago. And now, it's kind of a requirement. And it's so nice, right, to be able to connect to people from home. And it really does, I think, help with the work-life balance aspect of this job. It allows us to provide better services, probably for cheaper. I wouldn't say that our rates have gone down, but maybe they'll go up slightly less quickly. I have no idea, but I do think that there's a lot of benefits, and I think this is a welcome push to really, I think, improving the legal industry as a whole. So while obviously we're not thankful to have the virus, there's certainly some silver lining.
Yeah, no, I think so Skadden, of course, is famously a general practice law firm that covers many areas, but it's in my experience, sometimes intellectual property departments, who of course should be working with technology and really understanding innovation, sometimes in-house and with law firms are the most paper heavy and sort of attached to the old way of doing things for some reason. So
yeah, embarrassingly so, just to say it.
Yeah, there's some definite welcome pushes across the board there. So it sounds like we all kind of agree that there is an acceleration going on. Some of it from COVID, some of it just generally that needed to happen anyways. And Vanessa, I think this is kind of right in your wheelhouse. Does this increased need for digital transformation affect the types of investments, of startups, of companies you're interested in investing in or partnering with? How's that sort of changing how you see things?
I think for us, like, we've always been very, very focused on solving the pain points for our customers, and when it came to digital transformation, and now, if anything, the type of work that we're doing is just that much more pressing. And also the types of solutions that our customers are looking for are just that much more like sophisticated, and also just thinking about, well, we're going to be transforming now. Let's really think about for instance, the application of AI when it comes to like X, Y, and Z industry. How is that really going to transform? Like, you're able to have a lot of the conversations where, maybe previously a lot of the organizations were maybe like, okay, that's maybe way down the road. Like, they're willing to have those types of conversations now, and to think about the investments that are necessary in order for that to happen. And I think because of that, I would say the types of innovations that we can bring into the mix is just like that much more relevant. Like, I think like a year ago, for instance, if I'm just taking the automotive sector as an example, of course, like a lot of the OEMs were thinking about electric vehicles. They were thinking about fleet management, but not so much perhaps about like managing the retail channel for themselves, right? Like, I think like you fast forward now and they're just thinking like, oh my goodness, like we need to be able to have that type of data and the access to the data like a Tesla, like a truly vertically integrated company has. And we want to be able to have access to that too. Where can we, get that type of consumer insight from the data that we have? And so we're willing to look at different technologies that do that. That's a conversation that, ask us a year ago, we probably thought it would have been definitely 3 to 4 years out, but now it's like, it's really just the timing is now. So I think it's really much more about these, medium-term horizon types of innovations that are now part of the short term.
It's almost made you can kind of think a little bit further out, that you can think a little higher tech or a little more aggressively about what you might think is ready for a digital transformation in terms of a technology or a startup or investment.
That's right.
I thought it was interesting too. It kind of dovetails with something Daniel said earlier about, that Veritas kind of had maybe their part of the pie fairly digital, but then they started realizing that there was steps further down that also needed to be, they needed data from that or understand better how the processes were more digital. Is that something you're kind of seeing in terms of investments? Is that a very similar situation where, the further down with maybe your partners and your investments in the process, you can go a lot further in terms of where wow, we can actually access this data?
Was that to me or to Vanessa?
Oh, I think I was just, I was actually asked that to Vanessa, but Daniel, is that, I guess, did that strike a bell with you in terms of what Vanessa's comment was, with them looking at, automotive companies being interested in further down the value chain or further down the supply chain?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the big things that sticks out of me about what Vanessa talked about is a big ask that I get still today is, okay, can we find something? And by something, we mean machine learning or artificial intelligence. Can we find something to help us do that? So the attorney's coming to me saying, listen, I have an insane amount of email coming in. It's very hard for me to track all this traffic. Sometimes people are, my business partners, my clients are sending in requests for legal help. Is there some sort of tool that we can implement that will drive them to a self-service model, but it still comes to me, but it's not an email that they're waiting on? So in terms of artificial intelligence, thinking further down the road, this is something that legal operations managers think about all the time. And it's one of the pieces of the puzzle that I wanted to solve for this organization at some point. But now it's come really for a lot sooner than I thought we were going to get there. And so now we're able to think about, okay, what's the problem? First of all, what type of solutions are out there? You know, because we obviously, despite the fact that we need this, we don't want to create a problem where one doesn't exist, but we want to be as efficient about it as possible. So when Vanessa talks about, you know, the pressing issues and thinking about things further ahead, that's something that we had in mind, and we just decided, okay, we're going to do it. We're going to do it now.
And then Ken, I saw you kind of nodding along during part of that. Did part of that sort of remind you of maybe anything you've noticed or you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. One thing maybe I'll say that's a little bit different from what Vanessa said, although I'm sure she's right. She's more in the weeds on the operational stuff than me. But like before COVID-19, we already saw all this stuff. So I think what she's pointing to is like, and Daniel as well, this is happening even more frequently and with more use cases. But, you know, pretty much every deal I'm on now, if there isn't some AI ML angle, then the company like is asleep at the wheel or something. I feel like, just because even if, you know, because every company has data now, and like that's kind of what we're talking about here. Everyone has data, and the question is like, well, what can you do with the data? And the answer is all kinds of stuff. And I think what Daniel and Vanessa are pointing out is like a lot of the use cases that are getting a lot of focus now is how do we become more efficient? How do we be effective as an organization when we're forced to do that remotely, given the situation we find ourselves in.
No, thank you. And then Vanessa, one last kind of question for you on this topic. I mean, if someone on the call or on this webinar is thinking, wow, I think I might be able to solve Daniel's problem or some of the other problems I've mentioned, I think I've got a really good idea for a startup. Any recommendation on how, you know, how best to present themselves if they want to either partner with the SAP ecosystem or just generally make themselves attractive to investors like yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So at SAP.io, as I was mentioning before, there are two parts of what we do. We have the fund, where we've, ever since April 2017, we've made north of 30 investments, so it's about 10 a year. And then on the Foundry side, this is where we operate in 9 locations globally and run 2 programs a year in each location. And so through that, we work with north of 150 companies a year. And so definitely go on to our website, which is just sap.io. And then you can see the different programs that we're running. We have just planned our fall cohorts, and so we're set up for that, but we'll be announcing our spring cohorts coming up very soon. And we're not the only company that's running these types of programs. There are obviously many startup accelerator programs that are out there, including ones that are not operated by corporates like SAP. And so much of it is about finding the right fit and just finding the right partner to work with. Of course, when it comes to enterprise tech, if that is something that you are really in, would love to hear from you.
Fantastic. So I think the next question is for you, Daniel, and I think you already touched on this a little bit, but you know, you mentioned Veritas Technologies was pretty far along with some of the digitalization process, and it was the timing on that was very good to have been so far along. Can you talk about the ways in which Veritas was far along in terms of digital transformation before the pandemic, and maybe how you were able to leverage some of this in your rapid response to COVID-19, how you were ready for it? And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so, you know, our selling operation, the workforce operation, sales operations were rather remote, you know, to be as succinct as I can. People were traveling around the world. We were still using planes, cars, trains, all of those mechanisms to get to the customers, to land deals and stuff like that. So we weren't necessarily hurt when COVID came in and forced us to change the way that we did that. What we started to think about was, well, this is significantly transforming the way that we do business as a company, reaching our customers. We're not going to be able to use planes. We're not going to need hotel rooms. We're not going to need, all of those types of items anymore. So how do we sell and how do we reach our customers? So again, lots of team meetings, Zoom, WebEx, those are the types of things that we need to leverage. There were tools that we already had at our disposal because we were using them internally. So instead of having a one-on-one call to maybe land a deal for a new customer, it was bringing them on the phone. But at this point, instead of flying 4 or 5 people out to one location, which costs, this significant resources, not just for us, but for the customer as well, we can do it all in one, on a single call. So there were those types of opportunities which we could leverage because we were sort of already in the space. But I think what's interesting about Veritas, which I hadn't considered, was our IT infrastructure was not set up to be that way. So that was one of the things that we had to solve very quickly, right? Our IT infrastructure sits in India, and those folks went into the office every single day, logged into a portal, put on their headset, and they responded to the calls that were coming in. We couldn't do it that way anymore. But we had to get special permission from the Indian government in order for us to remove the computer equipment from the premises so those people could go home. But once they went and worked from home, the question became, how do they connect to the internet? As somebody who grew up with computers in front of me and an internet connection from the days of dial-up when I was, sorry, I'm dating myself here, in elementary school, to not have access to the internet to me was sort of mind-blowing. So the way that we solved that is we went out, we had to buy Wi-Fi dongles that they would plug into the machine so they can work at home. So that sort of is an example of a digital transformation that maybe you don't think of, maybe you don't consider because you take for granted the fact your Wi-Fi is always working, your computer is always on, but there are some pockets of the globe where that may not necessarily be true for you and something that you would have to consider.
No, that's great. And then Vanessa or Ken, did that strike anything about kind of that idea of being really kind of that readiness and still maybe missing a piece? I think a term I sometimes hear is sort of this lumpy digital transformation. We might have parts of an organization that are very, very up to speed, and then sort of something that by happenstance or maybe even regulation or geography in this case sort of makes it be a little bit behind. Vanessa, do you have any kind of similar experiences or thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I see that all the time with our customers and like just depending upon which part of the organization that you talk to, right? Like you're going to get a different answer. We work a lot with, for instance, the innovation teams of our customers, which might be, very different from the office of the CIO that's actually making the technology decisions where, obviously they're thinking about the P&L, they're thinking about the capital expenditures that are that would need to be made. And I think like I was just looking through the chat, one of the questions is like, well, as you are getting, of course, like a lot of margin pressure now over the last few months, just given the fact that revenues have been falling, like how can you make this investment in innovation? And that's always like the, that kind of like dichotomy that a lot of these companies are always grappling with. And so it's about the starts and stops. And I think like when there is a burning platform, like that pushes things over. So I think certainly the pandemic really highlighted a lot of that. I think anything that can help companies increase revenues or also at the same time decrease costs, like those are going to be the types of innovations that are going to have the most priority. And it just really depends upon the organization. Like I've been thinking a lot about the HR and organizational side. Obviously a lot of companies have been going through layoffs and they're trying to retain the talent that they have. How can they do that? How can they ensure that people stay connected and so that they can really deploy them in the right way, reskill them and do that, right? HR tech is usually an area which is very, very hard to find buyers in. But, now that's changing. And because like learning and development now, those budgets are now increasing because companies are realizing like, gosh, we have to invest in our people if we want to survive through this.
No, that's great. And that's actually HR, I think, is another area that I think, probably sometimes doesn't get all the love for technology. And I think it's super important now. And that's also one I think might have a lot of regulatory and legal constraints around it that it's really important to get right. So really interesting one there. So Ken, next question is for you. So you advise companies on M&A transactions, and these often have a very heavy technology component. Is there a digital transformation element to how you're advising your clients? Does it change maybe due diligence or anything about how you might advise a transaction or think about a transaction?
Yeah, I think if your question is focused on COVID-19, the answer is no.
Right. Okay.
I don't think so. Not really. If your question is broader, just generally digital transformation, I think.
And I was thinking broader, but that's actually super helpful to know, because I think that's important to kind of think about. These very large organizations are going to think a little bit longer term than that. So I think that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, because I think like I was mentioning earlier, a lot of these big companies and smaller companies, everybody is evolving, becoming more digital, and data is very important to most industries right now. And so more and more, a lot of our time and resources and focus is on data and aspects of how people use data. Where did you get the data from? What are you using it for? Who said you could do that? Often the answer is nobody. I just thought it was okay. Honest mistake. But if your business is built on an honest mistake, maybe it's not a good business to invest in. So those are the kinds of things we are seeing. And I think there's a lot of focus on it. And then, as you mentioned, Sam, a little bit ago, if it's regulated, even more so, right? So a lot of the most valuable data is regulated, financial data, health data, things like that. And so you have these complex, privacy laws. And then on top of that, you have the regulatory considerations. And it very quickly becomes a very complicated set of issues that are required to be navigated for the business to be kind of operational.
Right, and that's kind of what I was thinking is, one of the things about digital transformation is that it's going to generate lots of data that we're all going to get very excited about, and then at some point, someone like Ken's going to have to say, actually, we can't touch that data. That's extremely regulated, and it can't even cross country.
I'd never say that, Sam. I'd say there's the right way to do it, and there's a less right way to do it. Let's figure out the right way. But no one likes to hear no from a lawyer. That's bad for business.
No, that's fantastic. I want to move over to the questions because we're getting some really good ones in. And actually, this one I think is very much the other side of the coin to something I just said. So there's a lot of, we all feel like there's a lot of positives to digital transformation. And if COVID-19, as horrible as it is forcing that along, you can almost come away from this panel thinking it's a good thing that we're digitally transforming so fast. But one of the questions is about, a lot of these companies have lost a huge amount of income as a result of COVID-19. Is this creating constraints? The economic downturn itself, is that acting as kind of a counter force on the urge to accelerate digital transformation? Is that making it more difficult? And maybe Vanessa, I'll start with you because I think you've got some insight into sort of how you're working with some of these companies or these ones that are eager to maybe accelerate something, but maybe also sort of dreading the cost associated with it.
Yeah, I think the transformation is about like either those two levers that I was talking about earlier. Like, is this going to help me increase my revenue, or is this going to decrease my costs? And so, like a case in point is like I'm thinking about the retail sector, and just acutely, just so many retailers were losing a lot of business because they could not keep up with the customer service levels that a lot of their consumers were used to. And if you think about it from that perspective, right? Like, yes, they had to transform their customer service operations. And it was a pretty critical investment to make, because if they didn't do it, they were going to like lose even more sales. So yes, they were bleeding, but they were going to bleed even more if they did not address that. So like, I think the investments are being made where it is business critical. And that's what we've seen again and again and again. And like over the last few months, it's not about like a plan, like a nice to have. We're talking about must have.
No, that's a great answer. And then I guess, Ken, I mean, does this have any effect in terms of transactions, or is it maybe transactions need to be made? Maybe someone's like, wow, I'd really like to acquire this technology that may solve this problem, but we've got to weather the storm here. Is that something you might be hearing about, let's say, in the M&A sector?
I would say, sure, I'm sure there's some of that. But, in terms of big ticket M&A, 1 billion plus, it's hard to imagine that there would be that much M&A activity at that level focused on this one sort of narrow set of issues, unless it's like kind of a big ticket kind of play where that's the thesis for this merger. Like, for example, we did there was in the digital health space, Livongo was acquired by Teladoc. We represented Livongo. That was a pretty fast-paced deal, and it was very timely. And I suspect, I wasn't in the room, but I suspect a lot of that was driven by the fact that we are where we are in terms of COVID-19 and the need for these technologies in a regulated industry.
No, excellent. And then Daniel, sort of any thoughts from you in terms of, and maybe you don't want to talk about your own company, but just what you've seen in the legal operations world, is there some hesitancy to invest in some of these things Vanessa talked about? I mean, you almost need to do it if you're going to keep the customers happy, but those could be internal customers, people who need legal resources, but you see the ticket price, and all of a sudden it's there's some hesitancy. Is that something that you might see across legal operations?
Yeah, for sure. We do see it across legal operations. There's been a lot of questions. It's definitely an area that's bubbled up a little bit more in my space anyway. But I mean, to talk about the company level, because I have been exposed to that, and I found this to be rather, interesting, because I hadn't been exposed to this prior to COVID-19. The immediate realization of the economic impact of COVID-19 made some of our customers come to us and say, okay, whoa, we don't have the money for this anymore. And that was, sort of, I think, a breath of fresh air for our company to say, okay, you may think that you don't have the money, but if you don't protect your data the way that you've been protecting it in the past, and something goes wrong, do you have the money to come out of that in a post-COVID-19 world? And I don't know, because I'm not in the room for those conversations, but I suspect that most of those customers came back to us and said, you're right, we don't have the money to fix a problem that may happen like that. So a lot of the customers I know came back to us and said, okay, we want to renegotiate renewals, we want to renegotiate tech, we want to negotiate support. And I think our company's done a very good job at saying, the answer is not no. The answer is, have you considered X, Y, and Z, something else? And I think we've taken a very similar approach in legal operations, in terms of how we support our customers, how we interact with our outside counsel network, right? Some of our outside counsel network has come to us immediately upon realizing the economic downturn that they might be facing as a legal service provider. And we had a couple of law firms. We don't work with Skadden, so this doesn't apply to you guys, but we did surprisingly have a couple of big name law firms come to us and want immediate 50, 60, 70% rate increases for associates across the board, because they said, well, this is going to affect our business, so we need to protect ourselves right now. And I think we did a really good job about getting in front of it and saying, yeah, we need to assess the landscape of what's happening in our company, what our needs are, and what the needs of our business clients are, before we can just wholesale agree that your law firm, everyone at your law firm, is about to get a 70% bump. I suspect what happens there, though, is that those law firms may not have been bumping rates up over the years, and they saw this as an opportunity to just glom on and do it all at one time. But
I want to confirm, though, Dane, I just want to make sure I heard you right. Somebody asked you if they could bump their rates by 50% or more for some, that's insane, right?
We had 3 law firms. One was 50, one was in the 60 range, and one was 70%. Yes.
I would have expected the opposite. I would have expected you guys asking for a discount, not them asking for more money. So that's
and
amazing.
we have actually done that. We've locked our rates so that we will not accept any rate increases. And I mean, the last 3 weeks, you know, because I think we're getting to that point of the year where law firms start to review their rates and they want to make them applicable for the next calendar year. But we've locked them. And I think one of the most cathartic things that I can do is press reject on the rate increase. And, you know, of course, the partners, the relationship partners, they get very angry, they get very upset. They're like, whoa, you know, but it really comes down to the economics, right? Just because you haven't raised rates in your law firm over the last 2.5 years doesn't necessarily mean that Veritas has to start paying whatever it is you're demanding as a rate. This is another conversation about legal operations completely, where you talk about value-based pricing and flat fees and alternative fee arrangements. I won't even get into all of that, but the economics of it all, like it all ties in together, and it's a conversation. And if anything, what it's done is it's strengthened our relationship with our outside counsel so that we can have these sort of very frank conversations with folks who think, hey, now's a great opportunity to get in there and get some extra money.
No, that's an interesting comment too. Just it has the acceleration of digital transformation allowed some really frank conversations to happen across the board that may have needed to happen internally and externally. So we are coming to the top of the hour. I think this second question we received, I think, is a perfect way to sort of top things off. Someone asked, I hear that COVID-19 has forced us to accelerate DX. So I should have clarified at the beginning of the call. We have many people joining us from Japan tonight. And this morning for Japan. DX is a term of art in Japan for digital transformation. To keep up with the pace that we've never experienced before, our technologies, what are the technologies that are increasingly needed? And I think for each of the panelists, maybe starting with Vanessa and going around, what do you think is the top technology that we really need to focus on? And I think this particular person asked it with the COVID-19 in mind, but perhaps just more broadly, you know, going back to my chart at the very beginning, there seems to be a path that we're on. But where do you see the focus being? What's the most promising technology for digital transformation? We'll start with Vanessa.
I think I might be a bit biased because I sit on a board of a company that creates training data for AI models. And so I would say it's artificial intelligence, just thinking about so much of our conversation tonight, and that Ken and Daniel have also touched upon, is the fact that there's so much need for going through the reams of data that are out there and to really just distill the insights from that. And to do that, you need to have basically the right types of AI models trained up in order to do that. I mean, I think enterprise AI is just at the beginning. I think like we've seen the FANGs here in the US just really adopt that from a consumer point of view. I mean, you could see it when it comes to advertising relevance. You could see it when it comes to like speech and text and training there. But enterprise AI, just thinking about how do you apply that in across the different sectors, that's nascent. And I believe there's going to be tremendous growth in those areas.
Great. And Daniel, what's the technology you're most excited about, you think could change your life, perhaps as a legal operations expert, the most, but maybe more generally than that?
From my perspective in legal operations, you know, a lot of what we did was digitizing the contracts that we had in paper files, the matters, right? And we put them in a matter management system. For me right now, that matter management system is what's key. And it's the ML, the AI, because right now the questions that I'm getting asked, the things that I'm having to report out to my GC and her colleagues on the executive team, it's just about data and it's just about metrics. How many of this type came in? How many of that type did you do? How many hours did a law firm spend working on this? How much money did we spend on that? Could we have saved money if we pulled it in-house, right? So the matter management system as a whole, we use a matter management e-billing blended system, so we can do that fairly quickly, fairly easily, but it's the AI piece, it's the machine learning, so I don't have to manually crunch these numbers. That's what I'd like to see, is just, you know, not the nefarious use of AI and stealing and using data in ways that we're not supposed to, but just helping me crunch the numbers and put together, you know, a dashboard so executives can see, okay, here's everything that happened this month. and here's how we can make data-driven decisions moving forward.
Fantastic. And then Ken, what's your pick for the hottest thing in digital transformation technology?
So I'll choose a different answer, although their answers are at least as good as whatever I'm about to say. But you know, going back to an earlier theme in our discussion of, you know, how low tech, in some ways, all of our technology, you know, Daniel mentioned jumping on a plane. So, you know, travel and then meeting in person. Digital technology, some of which don't yet exist, I think, to facilitate more seamless communications, you know. So VR, AR types of technologies, I think we're not there yet. You know, there are a bunch of, you know, innovations I think are required to get us there. But once they are there, you know, it'll be as great as this Zoom is, which is it's great. It's not enough, right? I mean, to get that same level of connection, it's really hard to replicate that. And I'm talking about it both from a, you know, client development, business development perspective, like what Daniel mentioned, and also like more of like the HR tech. You know, what Vanessa was mentioning, one of the biggest challenges for our organization is it's fine for us to work remotely, but if I want to mentor a junior associate and make sure that he or she is learning as well as they would have if we'd been in the office, that's part of my job, it's part of my responsibility, and it's a real challenge right now. I don't know how to do it, you know, in short. So Vanessa, if you have any ideas, please let me know what technology I should be adopting there.
Lots of great ideas for anyone on the call looking to do a startup. And I actually do want to mention, someone had a really great suggestion. I think this is incredibly important. I don't want to not mention it, but one of the attendees mentioned that one of the most important things might be that broadband is not available to everybody. And we really can't do most of these things if you don't have access. And if you're in a rural area or someone doesn't have access to broadband, you are in very much left out right now. So I think any technology that improved that would be really amazing. So thank you for Thomas for sending that in. We are at the top of the hour. I think this has been a great panel. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pass it back over to Jiyoung to close out, but I do want to thank our panelists. You guys have been really fabulous, and I also want to thank our attendees. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Maybe just one last comment. Maybe starting from Vanessa, just last comment or any suggestions.
Yeah, I guess like one more thing we didn't get a chance to talk about is the advent of 5G and what that is going to bring. So I just wanted to leave that as a parting thought. Great.
Daniel?
I think the last comment about broadband and internet connectivity and just not being able, you know, not everybody having that, so it makes it very difficult to even start to have conversations about digital transformation. I think that's a very important part. Yeah.
Right. Ken, what about you?
I mean, just in general, anything we can do to get lawyers and law firms to be more efficient and more technologically savvy is good for everybody. We can do more with.
You can't just demand a 70% increase when you don't like what's going on. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we won't charge you anymore, Daniel. I promise. You know, ordinary rate increases. I just can't. It's phenomenal, that fact. Yeah.
Right. So Sam, any final closing remarks?
No, I just really appreciate everyone being able to join, and thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
So actually, we are, you know, we talk about the digital transformation today, but you know, we have to think about, okay, we have the data now, but what we should do with those, you know, stored data, big data. So actually, this is a series. So part one, we talk about the digital transformation, but we are planning the part two, which can be the big data. So harnessing big data for innovation. So we are planning this next series of webinar in October. So please stay tuned. And thank you so much. Thank you all for great panelists, for the great discussion. And thank you all for attending this event.